what we're going to talk about is the concept of I think it's called the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which came to light during this concept of wine versus water. Why? Because the halacha during the year is to use wine. However, the sages have learned that there's 3 extra letters in the verse, and those 3 letters spell out water. And we're going to see that in a second how that plays out. But the bottom line is that the sages of the Mishnah made it very clear that the mitzvah of the liquid in the sacrifices has to be water on Sukkot and not wine. And in order to do that, on the first night of Chol HaMoed, which was the second night of Sukkot, so for us it's still a holiday because we have an extra day in the diaspora, but in the land of Israel it was the second night of Sukkot, so it was the first night of Chol HaMoed, of the intermediate days. They would go out and they would celebrate the whole idea of drawing of the water of the well, and here the Mishnah describes how it would happen. How was the water libation performed? The golden jug was filled with water from the Siloam wellspring. A procession carried it from the Temple Mount, and when they reached the gate of water, they sounded the 3 shofar blasts: tekiah, a long blast; a teruah, which is the 9 blasts, and another tekiah. And they proceeded into the temple courtyard, and the Kohanim would carry the jug. They would climb to the altar ramp and turn to his left, and there were 2 silver basins there performed at the bottom with 2 nostril-like holes, in other words, where they would pour the water. 1 hole for wine libations, that was a wide, and the other hole was for water libations, which was narrow. This way, both the thicker wine and the thinner water would flow at the same rate. The Mishnah is basically describing the technicalities of how it was done. And they would ask the Kohen, the Kohen who was pouring the libation, to raise his hand. The Mishnah is telling us that why? Because one time there was a Kohen who poured the water on his feet instead of following the sage's rule of using water on Sukkot, and instead he was using wine, and everybody who was there stoned him with their esrogim. Esrogim are the citrus fruits that we use on Sukkot. I don't think he was badly hurt, but it was basically them rejecting the fact that he was not listening to the sages, that the idea was on Sukkot you use water and not the wine. Let's not dwell on this specific for a second, because I want to get to the concept of where we know that we use water, on Sukkot. So let's take a look quickly here. The first thing I want to do is create a foundation, or explain a foundation of how the law was derived from the Torah. And the logic of learning the law from the Torah, even though there's 13 principles that Rabbi Shmuel taught, that's in the Mishnah, it requires the knowledge of the sages who are on a higher level of spiritual knowledge and divine revelation to understand how the law was taught to Moshe, and they had to be part of a chain of knowledge going back to Moshe and Mount Sinai, and they were the ones who knew exactly how the law was meant to be interpreted, and we are students of that from the Mishnah and the Talmud. We do not have that knowledge and possess that knowledge to say, oh yeah, I could derive from these extra letters exactly what it means. We have to accept their understanding and their communication to us through the oral narration of the Torah. And that is what Jewish law is all about. And that is what determines basics of Jewish law. We do not look in the Torah, in the verses of the Torah, and say, here is Jewish law. Here's how we know what Jewish law is. We have it through the teachings of the sages the sages throughout the oral history of the Mishnah and the Talmud. So the water libation on Sukkot is a law given to Moshe on Mount Sinai, and the Torah's written text contains only a oblique allusion to it. Those who rejected the Torah's oral tradition rejected this ritual. So there's a concept in Torah, in Jewish law, called an asmachta. An asmachta means that the law is already understood by the sages because it was passed down from generation to generation. However, the Torah gives a hint through some extra letters or extra details that don't necessarily give you enough information, but it gives you a hint to prove what the sages are telling you. In other words, the written Torah isn't necessarily a complete source for the halacha, for the Jewish law. The source is Moshe at Mount Sinai, passing it down from generation to generation. But the Torah has a little nugget of hint that kind of confirms that for you. And that's what this is over here. Before we explain the idea of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and that whole concept, I want to first go into what this hint was. So the Torah, the Mishnah tells us that, I mean, this is from the Talmud, but it's also from the Mishnah because this was it's a quote from the Mishnah. So Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Beseda, says that the second day, when it says about the second day of Sukkot, so the Torah has 3 extra letters. The Torah says Niskehem, which is an extra yud. Right over here, there's an extra yud. B'shishi u'nisachaha. B'shvi kimishpatam. I'm sorry, there's an extra mem over here because it could say unisachaha, it doesn't have to say uniskehem, so there's an extra mem. Unisachaha is an extra yud, and kimishpatam, it could just say kimishpat. So there's an extra mem. So you have an extra mem, yud, and mem, and that spells out the word mayim. Mikan rames, from here we learn, I'm reading it straight from the Hebrew, but Nisuch HaMayim in Torah, from here we learn, or from here we have an asmafta, we have a hint, or we have a reliant from the Torah that what the sages taught us, that on Sukkot we use water instead of wine for the libations in the temple. That's the source that we use water instead of wine. You can look in the translation for more details, but bottom line is that in Jewish law, this was the law that the sages passed down to us from Moshe, from Mount Sinai, that on Sukkot, instead of wine, we used water. Okay, now I want to go into the idea of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The simple way to look at this is that the Sadducees, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I'm literally reading off the translation of how it's read, so if there's a better way to pronounce it, please correct me. But the Sadducees were the ones who rejected any oral narration, and they took the text literally, and they basically, this is the simple way of understanding the Sadducees, is they took the text literally and they rejected any of the rabbinic explanation. Basically, it was all about the text, and there was no and the rabbinic explanation was completely false. And they rejected any of it, which, by the way, was impossible because you cannot actually obey Jewish law without any you had to have interpretation. The Torah alone doesn't give you enough information to observe Jewish law. And there are plenty of examples that you see there's not enough information to go on, like tefillin or mezuzah. You should write on your wall. It doesn't tell you where or how on your door. Like, you need to have interpretation at some point. What are taitafes? What does that mean? You should put taitafes between your eyes. Like, what does that even mean? So if you're just going by the text alone and you have no interpretation, then you kind of are lost. So there's always going to be some interpretation. You just didn't like the rabbi's interpretation or the sage's interpretation. That's the simple understanding of the Sadducees. And the Pharisees were the ones who, in simple explanation, were the ones who accepted the rabbinic interpretation, going back to Moshe from Sinai. We consider Jewish law to be from the Pharisees, and today Jewish law, or the code of Jewish law, is from the Pharisees, so to speak. Now, I know there's a lot of other historic explanations or historic definitions, and I'm not going to address that. I don't know, true or false. I've read and I've watched documentaries. I don't necessarily subscribe to the validity of them. What I do know is that Judaism and Torah is meant to be the written text with the oral narration given to Moshe at Mount Sinai that was unveiled and taught through the sages throughout our history in the chain going back to Moshe, and that was revealed in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and that was explained through the commentaries, through the divine inspiration that was given to these holy people. Now, the Rebbe, as he does, has a different understanding of what was motivating the Sadducees. What was their problem? Why were they so anti-accepting the rule of the sages? And in this particular case, why does the Torah expect us to change the rule on a holiday from wine to water? Let's focus on that first, okay? Throughout the year, the sacrifices required wine, okay? Wine is a special drink. You don't drink wine during the day. At least you shouldn't. I mean, sorry, take that back. Usually, most people don't drink wine during the day on a random, lunch. Like usually wine is reserved for a special occasion, an evening, a dinner, something special. Wine is usually a luxury drink. Okay. Now, wine was included with the sacrifices, and that was the mitzvah. That was the commandment. On Sukkot, which it says clearly in the Torah, it's the holiday of joy. 3 times it says so. The Torah switches through the sages. The Torah switches the law from from wine to water. Why? Why do we go water? Even more puzzling, as we know, the experience of drawing the water was the most joyous experience in Jewish history. As we're going to see in the next screen, and we'll get to it in a minute, that when they would go draw the water from the well, it says whoever had not witnessed that kind of joy and dancing and singing and music that would happen when they would draw the water from the well to bring it to the temple, never experienced true joy. What was so joyous about that? So they're switching from wine to water, and we're so happy about it. In a way, it's just it should be just the opposite, if anything. And also, what's the logic behind the water, and why are we so joyous about it? Here's, by the way, the extra letters. I don't know why it adds the hey here, but really it's just the yud that's extra, but whatever. Anyways, this is where we know that the extra letters spell out the word mine. So here comes the supreme joy. So the pious and men and good deeds would dance before them while juggling flaming torches and chanting passages of song and praises to Hashem. The Levites played on their lyrics, harps, cymbals, and trumpets, and countless other musical instruments. That this was called Simchas Beis HaShoeva. It was the joy of drawing of the water. It was the happiest occasion of Jewish history. It says if you hadn't witnessed this, you haven't witnessed any joyous occasion in their lives. Here's the famous statement. It was from the Talmud. Those who haven't seen the joy of the drawing of the water have never seen joy in their lives. All right. And even till today, if you go to Crown Heights, they're dancing every single night of the intermediate days of Sukkot, starting from last night and tonight. And the whole Crown Heights is just one big party of dancing and singing to try to replicate the joy of the drawing of the water. And it's called Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which means the joy of drawing the water. But logically, what are we so happy about? So now let us answer this question before we go back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because this really is what is going to give us the core of this class. The idea of water, drunk on water is the name of our class. And what does this represent, and why is the joy connected to water? So we know that joy is central to Judaism. We know that being happy and doing the mitzvahs with joy is central to our faith. It's core to everything that we do. In fact, in the Tochacha and Kisava, when it says of all the curses and all the terrible things that will befall us, it says, why? Because you didn't serve God with joy. Why? Because if you serve God with joy, joy erases all the negativity. In other words, it breaks all the negative the xeris, all the negative things that might happen. Joy could erase that all. Joy, it breaks all boundaries. So serving God with joy is a core value of Judaism. So we know that, right? Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have what to be joyous about. So why does the water bring out this joy? So this is just, verses from the Psalms trying to show us the value of joy. So now we know that this is the holiday of joy. Sukkot, it says in the Torah 3 times joy. And there are many reasons why. That because this is our own joy. I think we had a class we had a class on Shabbat about this. Those of you who were there, we talked about that Sukkot is like we're about to Teshuvah, because on Passover we're like all infants, we're like newborns, we're all equal. But on Sukkot we're like the level of Baal Teshuvah, because now we've put in our own effort. So it's our own joy, and we're actually choosing to be joyous. But either way, the Torah tells us Vayisa'ach Sameach, that this is a time for joy. And we know that this is called Zman Simchasenu, this is the time for joy. So Sukkot is a holiday of joy, established, done. I know I'm going through these texts pretty fast, but now what we really have to get to is why the water. Why would the water bring this out? What is the connection with water? Number one, why does the sorry, why is the water the conduit for this joy, the drawing of the water? And why does the Torah in the first place switch the law of the sacrifices being wine to being water? In other words, if anything, it should be just the opposite. So why does the Torah switch the law that it should be water on Sukkot, which is the holiday of joy? And why did the water bring out the holiday, bring out the joy so much? So what we're going to do is dive into a concept of experience. An experience in Judaism is something that is very important for two reasons. One is because experience, for judgmental reasons, actually, could be a negative. If a judge experiences a situation, if a judge is a witness, an eyewitness to a situation, he can't be a judge. He's not a legal judge anymore. Because someone who's actually experienced it or seen something, they no longer could use their brain to properly judge a situation because their eyes and their experience is no longer allowing their brain to think clearly. When you experience something firsthand, you don't, your brain doesn't have any say in the matter because you've experienced it. If you experience a supernatural event, or you experience any crazy experience, your brain will not be able to talk you out of it. You have experienced it. And that's why the Torah says that when you hear something, it's incomparable to seeing. So all of the sages who studied Kabbalah and studied about all the great levels of godliness and all the deepest secrets of godliness, they were on the level of hearing. They were on the level of studying in a sense of like understanding intellectually. But the prophets, what made the prophets so great, even though they may not have intellectualized to the greatness of the Kabbalists, like the Arizal and many others, but they were the prophets were on the level of seeing. They experienced it, which was on a whole nother level. Why is this important? Because what happened on Sukkot was something, or what people experienced with the drawing of the water was an experience that was beyond anything that could be intellectualized. When they drew the water, they experienced a level of joy that doesn't have any room for intellectual understanding. And I want to share something interesting, though, and I think I could share this, to whoever's on the Zoom. If you've been at one of my father's talks about his experiences at the Rebbe, right? And he talks about what he's experienced in 770 with the Rebbe. Like, you can't fathom what he's talking about because, like, he's experienced it. And he tries as hard as he can to communicate and to elaborate and to paint the picture and create the vibe or recreate the experience, but none of it does justice. And he almost gets frustrated by not being able to do that because for him, he experienced it firsthand and he's not able to bring it to words because for everyone else who's talking to, they haven't experienced it. And hearing about it versus experience it, seeing it doesn't connect. No matter how much you try. You can have the best communicator, the best orator, the best picture drawer, or whatever it is that whatever talent the person has, you cannot take someone who's experienced something and have them communicate that to someone else, and even in the most articulate way, in a way that they should experience it as well. They can get close, they could try, but it's still not going to be the same. What happened at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, what the people experienced when they drew the water, was so special that there was no way for the sages to communicate what happened, what they were experiencing, the level of godliness that was being revealed, that it was just beyond communicate. It was beyond communicatable. It was the essence of the soul. Now, what is the definition of this type of joy? Sorry, what is the definition of this type of joy? So the Rebbe Rashab gives examples. For example, he talks about someone who's at a father who's celebrating their child's wedding, right? So there's a level of joy that they're experiencing that, obviously their friends and family are experiencing it with them, but it's not on the same level of joy. They're much more, they're on a whole nother level. They're on a whole nother experience because for them, the joy is boundless. The energy is boundless. They can't describe it. They can't explain it. I don't want to go deeper into that, because I think it's pretty understood what's happening. So, but let's read this. We can dance with abandon we can dance with abandon without a shred of self-consciousness, even if we are supremely self-conscious. This is because exuberance brings out our deepest selves and bypasses all our superficially imposed limitations. Another example. Wise scholars who are truly reserved and hesitant to share their complex theories with students, friends, or family can lose all restraints during times of joy and wax eloquent to anyone willing to listen. So the idea of joy, it opens it up, it breaks those barriers, it allows us to really experience who we are and communicate ideas to other people in ways that are beyond any level of explanations, or sorry, any level of limitations, because joy has a way of breaking through all those boundaries. Joy also stimulates our most profound abilities. Concepts we are ordinarily struggle to understand become suddenly clear to us when we are delighted, especially under the influence of wine. Joy reveals the latent wisdom embedded in our soul's deepest reaches. We see this all the time. Someone says l'chaim in a good way, in a healthy way, not in a irresponsible way, but it could also bring out a level of joy and a level of breaking the boundaries for them to share wisdom or other inspirational words that they may not be comfortable sharing under normal circumstances. So enabling us to master the most complex theories. This is all because joy reveals our deepest hidden selves, melting away our usual artificial self-imposed boundaries. Jubilance reveals everything without limit, both external gestures like dancing with abandon and internal capacities such as wisdom and kindness. So now that we know joy is so special and joy breaks all these boundaries, what really happened at the Sukkos Beis Hamikdash? We know that it was a level of experiencing, like seeing versus hearing, that they experienced godliness, they experienced something that they could not communicate. They experienced a level of revelation that doesn't lend itself to be communicated with. You cannot intellectually understand what was happening there. So here's why water became the symbolism over wine. So this is where it gets interesting. Wine is a defined concept, okay? Wine, I can tell you I had the most delicious wine last night, right? And I could try to explain it to you, and you might understand it. It tasted like this, it made you feel like this, it did this, it whatever. And I can actually try to get you that kind of wine. It's a definable experience. When somebody is happy because of wine, okay, let's call a spade, they're a little bit tipsy. It's happiness, okay, I won't take it away from them, but it's understandable happiness. They've had a few l'chaims, okay, good, very nice. We're talking about responsible drinking here. We're not talking about irresponsible and selfish drinking or irresponsible drinking. But either way, it's a definable situation. It's definable joy. And it's not necessarily anything unique. It's the rest of the year. So that's why the rest of the year, it's wine. It's about elevating the wine. It's about elevating the luxury of wine to a higher level. Most people see wine as a party. Most people see wine as let's go out for drinks with our friends. Let's go to a fancy dinner. Nothing wrong with that. But the Torah wants us to elevate the wine, elevate the spirituality, elevate the happiness, and that's why we bring it with the sacrifices. That's the rest of the year. But either way, it's definable. It's definable both on a regular, for the parties and for mundane matters, and it's definable even in spiritual matters. Because when you make kiddush on wine, it's still a definable joy. Or you say l'chaim on wine, also a good cause. It's a definable joy. Or even if you bring wine with the sacrifice, it's a definable joy. It has flavor. It has something to it. But water, on the other hand, is completely neutral. There's nothing definable about water. Water is just the essence. You need water. Is there flavor? I had the best water last night. Nobody says that. Now with bottled water and all the different fancy titles and scams of selling us, H2O or whatever. But the point is, water is water. And the idea of water transcends the idea of limitations. It transcends the idea of difference. and it transcends the concept of definability in joy. But more importantly, water represents the idea that there is nothing to be happy about. Bear with me. Bear with me. When somebody gives you a gift, or when somebody is special to you for a reason, and you celebrate that relationship, your relationship is special because of that reason, and you're happy because of that reason. If you're happy because someone did something special for you, if you're happy because someone gave you a gift, or you're happy because someone is a very nice person or tells you funny jokes or makes you laugh, it's a definable joy. It's a definable experience. That's what wine is. Water represents the idea that transcends definability. It transcends any reason. It transcends a relationship. It's a relationship that transcends any tangibility. And that's what we're celebrating on Sukkot. The joy that God is talking about, the joy that you have to have when you are celebrating this holiday, wine is not going to cut it. Wine won't do it for that's for the rest of the year. The rest of the year, the job is to elevate materialism to spirituality. That's for wine. Or even on a Shabbat. A Shabbat is also about elevating wine to spiritual. Fine. But Sukkot is a level of joy that transcends that. Sukkot is about the essence of the soul. It's about the level of something that cannot be defined. And that's why the joy was so great and the revelations of godliness was so great, because it tapped into the essence of something that cannot be defined. And therefore, the sages couldn't tell you why it was so joyous. The sages couldn't tell you what was so special about it. The sages just had to say, if you didn't experience it, you never experienced joy. This is so special because it's just unlimited joy. That's what makes it so special. It's the joy of the soul. It's the joy of your essence. It doesn't lend itself to anything. It's the joy of commitment to God that doesn't have any rhyme or reason. And that's what they were celebrating at the drawing of the water. And that's what makes the joy on Sukkot so special. So now we're going to elaborate how this plays out. A law about when to say a blessing over wine and water demonstrates how different they are. We always say a blessing over wine, but we only say a blessing over water if we are thirsty. This is because water is not nourishing, has no taste or color, and refreshment is the only pleasure it yields. Wine has a flavor and inspires joy, so it's always pleasurable. By the way, we don't necessarily follow this halacha. We always make a bracha no matter what on water, but there is an opinion that says that you only make a bracha on water if you're thirsty. If you're not thirsty, you don't make a bracha. Once again, in today, the way we practice is we make a bracha no matter what when we drink water. Make a blessing, when we drink water no matter what, but there is an opinion that you only make a blessing when you are thirsty. Wine alludes to aspects of Judaism we understand and enjoy. This is the punchline here, though. Wine is the idea of this pleasure of Judaism, things like Shabbat. You take 20, you unplug, and it's so important, family time, or lighting candles, bringing light to the world, or the idea of charity, things that make sense, things that we enjoy, things that we could explain. Wine, that's the wine of Judaism. That's things that make sense. Water represents aspects of Judaism we prefer only because God instructs them. No reason. Yet since we are thirsty for spirituality and we want to connect to God, and we're not necessarily looking for reason, we want to be close to God, we exalt in serving God out of obedience. It's like drinking water to be refreshed. So the joy is because we get to be close to God, and that's all that matters. So we're not looking necessarily for the rhyme or reason. When people just want everything to be pleasurable, and they want everything to make sense, and they want everything to be understood, then they need wine. They can't handle water. Water doesn't make sense to them. They can't, they need it to be wine. They need it to have flavor. But a Jew is expected to thirst for water. A Jew is expected to say, I want to be close to God, even if it doesn't taste like anything, even if I don't understand it. The practice, the obedience to God, to be close to God, I'll do whatever it takes, and I'll celebrate it, because that's what it means to be connected to God, even if it's beyond my understanding. And this is where, this is where the Sadducees had a problem, but let's read this first, then we'll get to that. So the Rebbe says like this: though we sing God's praises daily over wine and we sang them over water libations during Sukkot. We were instructed to draw the water with joy. The water is neither flavorful nor sweet. We drew it with joy. Our understanding didn't generate it. We didn't understand the mitzvah. That's not why we were happy. It was by divine ordinance. Therefore, it didn't need to be over wine. It wasn't because we weren't dancing because, we have wine to drink. That's not why we were happy. We were happy because we were doing what God wanted us to do. Therefore, it didn't need to be over wine. If God wanted us to rejoice over water, we rejoiced over water. And we rejoice because God commands it. The joy is as endless as God. And therefore, it's limitless because now we're connected to God, which is infinite, who is infinite. No matter where we stand on the spectrum of Jewish engagement, this joy permeates and suffuses us fully because it doesn't matter. There's no limitations here. There's no differences here. We're connected on an infinite level at this point. It's not a matter of intellectual capacity. That's wine. Wine, some people are bigger wine connoisseurs and they understand the higher level of wine or low. We're beyond that. When it comes to the water, when it comes to the celebration of the water, when it comes to the connection that is revealed through the drawing of the water, we are on a level of connection to Hashem that transcends any difference. Being submersed by God endlessly makes our joy endless. So this is why on Sukkot the mitzvah was specifically with water and not with wine, because we're celebrating the selfless surrender, which unlocks a joy so deep because we're connected to Hashem and it transcends all boundaries. So now, let's read this and then we're going to get to the Sadducees. Jewish festivals are designed to remind us of the exodus from Egypt. They are happy days because we rejoice over the freedoms and exodus that granted us we still enjoy. However, that is rational happiness and commensurate with how much we understand and appreciate these freedoms. The limitations of our understanding is the limit of our joy. So we're celebrating freedom, but if we're not really free, then we kind of are not as happy as we should be. No matter how vast our understanding is, it is still finite. That we will understand is better tomorrow. Demonstrates that today's understanding is limited because, the idea of exodus from Egypt is a constant, every day we're constantly growing in our knowledge and growing in our exodus and growing in our freedom. So it means that we're always limited in a sense because tomorrow is going to be more. The joy that results from this understanding is similarly finite. That it will grow tomorrow indicates it has yet to permeate the part of our brain that will reach tomorrow. Thus, it has not transcended all limits. However, on Sukkot, it's just the opposite. On Sukkot, we're able to transcend those limits because on Sukkot, our happiness, our joy is about God, and there is no reason. And happiness beyond reason doesn't lend itself to limitations. And this is where the Sadducees had a problem because they could not understand, they could not handle the idea that you're happy for no reason. They needed to have the flavor. They needed to have the reasoning. It wasn't about the sages per se. And here's what the Rebbe says. The Sadducees agreed with the wine libations because it represented the practicing the elements of Judaism we can understand. Wine is flavorful and enjoyable, stimulating the latent qualities that could be utilized for Judaism. It made sense. It's about internalizing and understanding what Judaism is all about and how to make it real for them. That was what they wanted. By contrast, water is bland. It neither arouses a desire to praise God nor reveals latent qualities. It's just like, what are you getting excited about water for? There's no materialism to elevate here. There's no understanding. There's no conversation. There's no discussion. There's no intellectual stimulation. Most importantly, it isn't flavorful or stimulating. The Sadducees argue that the Torah should be rewarding and not followed by blind obedience. There should be a intellectual reward, not necessarily like a physical reward, but there should be something that we could look forward to at the end of it. Not just dancing because God told us to. Each generation should be able to read God's book and interpret it without relying on explanations and tradition transmitted by previous generations. We should be able to just understand it naturally with our own intellect and not have to have a commitment to the sages. Blind obedience is not the Torah way, according to the Sadducees. And this is why they rejected the water libations. To them, the idea of commitment, the idea of surrender, the idea of commitment to God in a way that sometimes transcends our intellect was something that they could not handle, they could not accept. And therefore, it wasn't that they rejected the idea of the sages, it's just that they rejected the idea of blind obedience to the Torah. And to them, that was represented in wine and water, and that's why the Mishnah tells us the story of the person who poured the wine, because for them, wine is what they wanted from Torah. They didn't want the water. They didn't want the blind obedience. They didn't want the transcending the above above the intellectual capacity. To them, they wanted to be able to draw it down into their intellectual and emotional capacity in a way that they understood it. The idea of transcending on the holiday of Sukkot to them didn't make any sense. I want to share something. Okay, let's just read this. The Sadducees rejected the water libations because they wanted a Judaism that made sense and brought personal reward. As a result, they missed out on the transcendent joy. I'm not going to go into modern day thought in this idea, but it is very important to understand that what a fundamental value in Judaism is the ability to commit even when it doesn't make sense. Even when our Judaism is sometimes irrational, and sometimes the commitment to follow Judaism sometimes doesn't make sense, like drawing of the water, like being joyous when we draw water, is a foundation of Judaism. And this is represented in this idea. I do want to mention something very personal. I say very personal, I don't mean personal to me, but personal to all of us. It was 2 years ago, as we know. It was the Shmini Atzeres, which fell on October 7th. And it was the holiday, so we didn't have internet, or we didn't have access to our own internet, but we obviously heard what was going on. And many people were telling us that we have to cancel the Simchas Torah, the dancing on Simchas Torah. We have to cancel the celebration of Simchas Torah. And Chabad was heavily criticized for this, not just in Charlotte, but all over the world. But in Charlotte as well, many Israelis were very, very upset with us that we still danced on Simchas Torah that year, and 2 years ago, that we still danced the night of Simchas Torah, which was the night after October 7th. And here's the reason why we did it. We weren't dancing because we were happy. We were just as broken as everyone else. We were shattered. We were broken. We all were broken. But the dancing on Simchas Torah is not because we're dancing out of joy, of happiness of life, and life is amazing. We're dancing because God told us to dance. Same reason why we cry on Tisha B'Av, the same reason why we eat matzah on Passover, the same reason why we pray in the morning, and whatever it is. God wants us to dance. So we're going to dance and we're going to cry while we're at it because we can't help ourselves, but we're going to dance. When the connection is to God, it's not about how we feel. It's not about what we feel makes sense. And just because we feel like I don't feel like dancing right now, that's what God said. You need to dance. And we're going to dance. There was a story when the previous Rebbe was very ill in 770, so it was Simchas Torah as well. And when the doctor said that the previous Rebbe needs to rest, and that everyone should refrain from making noise. So the Rebbe, who was not the Rebbe yet, but he was still considered to be the I guess the respected leader. What did he do? He gathered everyone together. He says, Simchas Torah, we have to dance. So he gathered everyone together, and they started dancing. And instead of singing, they danced shh, 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 like dancing around, but like saying shh. A whole night they danced like that. In other words, when you're committed to something, the commitment is to dance. Then tonight we have to dance. It's a mitzvah to dance. We're not dancing because we're happy about life. We're not dancing because we drank wine. We're not dancing because intellectually it makes sense to dance. We're dancing because this is what God wants us to do. Just like they danced when they drew the water, it made no sense. I don't mean to go back to those horrible moments, but at the same time, there's a level of commitment to God that Jewish people survived with, that regardless of the situation that we're in, our commitment to the practice of Judaism, every little detail of Judaism, regardless of the circumstances, whether it was in the camps of Auschwitz, whether it was in the gulags of Siberia, we found a way to practice when it beyond any level of it making sense. And that is what sustained us, and that's what allowed us to be able to still continue being alive and being a people today. So it is these principles that give us the inspiration and the passion and the value and the values that transcend intellect, transcend reason, and make everybody scratch their heads. How are we still in existence when everybody hates our guts, when everybody wants to kill us? So this is who we are. This is the foundation of who we are, and this is represented in the joy of the water of Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Let's hope that we could bring this joy into fruition. We can bring this joy into our lives, and we should have no more suffering with the coming of Mashiach. We should have the ultimate joy with the coming of Mashiach. So thank you so much. It should be a happy and healthy Sukkot for everyone, and only good things.